your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Well, some shocking video has surfaced online of a senior who was allegedly left on the floor of the Lethbridge Medical Clinic after collapsing. Dave Woods, a nearby witness who recorded the incident, says he was appalled that nobody in the office allegedly tried to help the man as he was lying on the floor in pain. Woods claims he himself is disabled and was therefore unable to assist the man. Angela Stewart has the story.
I told him to get up, but...
Well, he can't get up.
A man in distress, lying on the floor of the Lethbridge Medical Clinic. Minutes go by without a single person intervening.
Are you going to get this man some help?
Yeah, the doctor is getting the help from
It was bad. I didn't like it.
Dave Woods, a nearby witness, is the man behind the camera.
I had gone to the doctor's office to get my prescription refilled, and I walked in, I sat down, and I noticed this gentleman was across from me.
Woods says he overheard the man complaining of pain to a staff member behind the counter.
He got up and he went to the desk and said that he couldn't sit there no more. He was in too much pain, and he couldn't even sit there, he said, and he had to get off his feet. Next thing you know, I'm looking at it, and he's just getting down, and he's down on the floor. And I look around, and no one's doing nothing.
The video from Monday, which has been posted to social media, caused a stir among viewers, gaining over 12,000 views and 411 shares.
I was the only one standing there helping him.
Woods, who is struggling with his own medical conditions, says he was unable to help the man by himself.
I just had a heart attack not 2 months ago, and I'm recovering from cancer, and I can't even bend down to tie up my own shoes and stuff like that.
Adding, this type of situation is completely unacceptable.
What's going on with people nowadays? Where there's no compassion, because everybody was just sitting there like looking around, like they weren't even looking around, they were looking at their phones.
Bridge City News did reach out to the Lethbridge Medical Clinic for comment, but did not receive a response in time for broadcast. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
The clinic did end up calling the Lethbridge police, who showed up a short time later. Truth and Reconciliation Week kicked off in Lethbridge this past week, where the Métis and Reconciliation flags were raised outside City Hall. Many took part in the flag raising, including a Blackfoot elder, Mike Brucehead. Brucehead says he would like to see the idea of reconciliation happen all the time, not just for 1 week.
You don't have to be reminded every year that, hey, this Reconciliation Week, that you do your own reconciliation every day, wherever you work, wherever you live, wherever you communicate. And that's what I'm saying, it's got to be embedded in the conscience of people to go out, get along with people. They don't need a reminder, but I think I'll be around for a while till everybody understands. Reconciliation, it's here to stay. It's not going to go away. And we're going to keep reminding people, hey, be part of it.
The city observed September 30th as the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. All city facilities were closed as a result. Medicine Hat MLA Michaela Frey announced that she will not be seeking re-election next spring. The UCP MLA, who was elected in 2019, said it was a difficult decision, but it's the right one for her and her husband as they tried to grow their family. Frey says she was proud of standing up for law-abiding firearms owners and being involved in many committees over the years while helping to get certain policies passed in the legislature. She says she'll spend her remaining time in office focusing on improving access to health care services. Well, it's been about a year since Lethbridge citizens elected a new mayor and council. Earlier this week, I chatted with Trevor Lewington to ask what he's hearing from business owners in our region.
What I'm hearing generally is that people are pleased there's a focus on the economy and being business friendly. So the new council did set out an action plan at the end of last year, right after they were elected. And they have their number one priority on their list was economic development. So they are very focused on job creation. They're very focused on becoming more business friendly as a community, which I think is good. There's a commitment to that. I do think the business community is very concerned about increasing costs that might come from either changes to utilities like garbage and water and sewer, or in fact, property taxes. So, as businesses are dealing with inflationary pressures on wages, or they're facing inflationary pressures on things that we've already talked about, like electricity and natural gas, The last thing a business wants, of course, is more costs passed on to them through higher taxes.
After the break, we have more about truth and reconciliation in our province, plus a last-ditch Hail Mary visit to southern Alberta by a UCP leadership hopeful. Keep it right here.
The AHS board has demonstrated through these past 2.5 years that they can't do the kind of restructuring or management of our COVID response that we need to. Every decision that has been made has made things even worse.
Welcome back. As the country honors and observes National Truth and Reconciliation Day, the Alberta government made a historic announcement of 23 First Nations buying a stake in the province's oil and gas pipelines. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney made the announcement on Wednesday.
This is a $1.1 billion deal with $250 million backstop from the government of Alberta, making this possible, that will be generating significant revenue in the long term, revenue that these First Nations and Métis communities can literally bank on, that yes, they can use to improve education and social services for their people, but they can also invest in other income generating economic opportunities and investments, becoming full partners in our economy.
Alberta is just under a week away from finding out who the next leader of the United Conservative Party will be. The latest polls indicate that Danielle Smith is still the front runner to become Alberta's next premier. Smith was in Coaldale, Alberta Wednesday morning as one of 70 stops along her campaign trail. She says one of her plans, should she take office, is to fire the entire board at Alberta Health Services because of how they managed the pandemic.
The AHS board has demonstrated through these past 2.5 years that they can't do the kind of restructuring or management of our COVID response that we need to. Every decision that has been made has made things even worse. And so we need to fire the AHS board, put an official administrator in place that reports directly to the health minister and the premier so that we can fix some of these problems. I mean, one of the issues raised here today was on the issue of rural ambulance, which has gotten worse and worse and worse. The mayor of Coaldale was here telling us how terrible the response times are now and how many code reds they are. They want to take back over their ambulance service, and any community that's prepared to do that should be allowed to do that.
During her campaign, Smith has received a lot of criticism of her proposed Alberta Sovereignty Act. Some, including Premier Kenney, say it will never pass and is unconstitutional. Smith says that some help with adjusting how the Sovereignty Act will work with Canadian law is coming from a name familiar to a lot of Canadians.
Brian Peckford is the last living signatory of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution, so he knows how our country is supposed to work. And he has said that the Sovereignty Act is an important first step in us changing our relationship with the rest of the country back to the way it was supposed to work. That the federal government has no more right to legislate in our areas of jurisdiction than we do in theirs, and that's what we've got to be asserting.
The Alberta government announced some financial help for consumers who will be experiencing higher heating bills this winter. A natural gas rebate program will take effect October 1st till March 31st. The exact amounts will depend on the default natural gas rate each month. Officials say if the rate from a provider goes above $6.50 per gigajoule, rebates will be issued to eligible consumers, covering the difference between the $6.50 and the regulated rate on a consumption basis. A battle between members of Alberta's Criminal Defence Lawyer Association and the province is heating up. As of Monday, defence lawyers in Alberta are no longer taking legal aid cases. Protests have been held in Calgary, Edmonton, and Red Deer as lawyers are not happy. Greg White, a defence lawyer from the Michael Dietrich Law Office in Lethbridge, says there are two main messages the groups want to drive home to the Alberta government.
The financial eligibility guidelines that have been set by the government of Alberta are too high. What I mean by that, as an example, is somebody who is on AISH, somebody who's making only $1,600 a month, they do not qualify for legal aid. Legal aid has been underfunded for many, many years. And we're asking the Alberta government to increase the tariffs for defense lawyers who are representing persons on legal aid.
Meanwhile, Justice Minister Tyler Shandro says legal aid is fully funded by the province. Earlier in May, a modernization review was undertaken to look into the Legal Aid Alberta system in the province. He says the review will be completed in October.
For us to take one part of how legal aid or the criminal defense bar is compensated, and to take that one part and to make a decision now would undermine the whole review. We're a month away from it now. We've said openly that we're willing to take a look at the tariffs and whether there needs to be an increase. We're willing to work with the criminal defense bar.
Shandro added that legal aid has enough money and he will be monitoring closely to make sure people who are in need of a lawyer have access to them. We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we tell you why the Justice Minister is slamming the feds.
This is politically motivated confiscation, pure and simple. One that will do nothing to make Alberta a safer place or to reduce the criminal misuse of firearms.
Alberta Justice Minister Tyler Shandro has blasted the federal government firearms ban. Shandro calls the move by Trudeau Liberals an overreach, which unfairly targets law-abiding gun owners. He said these were all firearms that were acquired legally, and his government will not work with Ottawa to help to confiscate around 30,000 guns.
The list of over 1,500 banned models were all previously non-restricted or restricted firearms, and include hunting rifles and shotguns, as well as historical artifacts almost 100 years old. And while the federal government has labeled them as, in their words, assault style, end quote, that's a label designed to scare Canadians who are unfamiliar with firearms. It's a description based purely on their appearance and not on any unusual danger that they pose or mechanical capability that they possess. Indeed, these guns are not materially different from any number of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that continue to be legal for any qualified Albertan to own. This is politically motivated confiscation, pure and simple. One that will do nothing to make Alberta a safer place or to reduce the criminal misuse of firearms. And so I responded to Minister Mendicino by telling him that no, Alberta will not assist the federal government in this or any federal effort to strip lawfully obtained personal property from our residents.
Lethbridge West NDP MLA Shannon Phillips, along with NDP critic for advanced education David Egan, shared their thoughts on how the Alberta government can better support young people who choose to study and work in the province. Phillips says a good strategy to get post-secondary students to not only come to Lethbridge to study but to work here post-graduation is to establish a future leaders council.
There is no question that our economy needs young people to graduate out of this institution, out of the college, and stay here to build the kind of economy that we want to see. That is why we need a council to make sure that that voice is being heard, not just from Edmonton, not just from Calgary, but the tremendous amount of integration that already exists between our post-secondary institutions and the broader community down here in the south, and how we can build on our strengths going forward.
A Future Leaders Council would give students an opportunity to be a part of the conversations when it comes to talks about post-secondary education. And speaking of post-secondary, the province announced it's investing $5 million to support and expand opportunities for Indigenous students. That includes a $750,000 grant for the Trade Winds to Success Training Society, which creates opportunities in the trades. Officials say up to $3.25 million will be used to increase programs and seats for Indigenous learners at First Nations colleges and post-secondary institutions. Up to $1 million will also go toward workforce development initiatives. And here's some good news for high school students in our province. The government announced that diploma exams will only be worth 20% of a student's final grade for the 2022-23 school year. The government cited pandemic-related learning challenges as they heard back from educational partners on the issues students are facing. The weighting will go back to 30% the following school year. In 2015, the Alberta government shifted the weight of diploma exams from 50% down to 30%. And starting in the spring of 2023, Alberta drivers are set to receive a reprieve while they cruise down the road. The government is no longer requiring drivers to take the advanced road test for Class 5 and 6 licenses. This means Albertans will save $150 by not having to take a second road test. Around 700,000 drivers in the province have their graduated driver's license and are qualified to take the advanced road test. The province says about 500,000 drivers will be able to opt out of the GDL program. Alberta's Child and Youth Advocates has released a report into the deaths of 15 young people in government care, and most involve drugs. Of the deaths that took place between October 2021 and last March, 9 were a result of confirmed or suspected drug toxicity, and 12 were Indigenous youth. Ages ranged from 6 to 19 years old. Last year, the Advocate's Office called for the United Conservative Party government to develop a youth-specific opioid and substance use strategy, but it says no progress has been made on that recommendation. Advocate Terry Pelton says a harm reduction approach is needed for youth with addictions to get their foot in the door to recovery. Well, after the break, an Indigenous sport that's rising in popularity. That's next. As the nation honors Truth and Reconciliation Day, we wanted to focus on an Indigenous sport that's rising in popularity. Last weekend, spectators, including Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, watched the Indian horse relays in Lethbridge. BCN's Naveen Day was in attendance and says Kenney was also honored with a Blackfoot name.
Just past these gates is where many southern Albertans go to try their luck at winning big money on which horse they hope will win at the track. But this past weekend, the Rocky Mountain Turf Club was home to a sacred sport that is one of the oldest in North America. Indian horse relays are an adrenaline rush both for the players and the spectators. The sport, which is hundreds of years old, has recently risen in popularity across Alberta. Allison Redcrow, owner of the team Old Sun from the Siksika First Nation, says he formed the team because of how fun the sport is. He adds the surge in popularity came from young people taking an interest in the game.
This is our sport, and it's, I hope it always remains among us because we got it going. And we've been doing this, believe it or not, for probably 200-300 years. But now it's really gained popularity because of the amount of young people that are getting involved with it, participating in it. So, it brings a lot of people, family together, and, it's just a great sport to be involved with.
Without horses, I'll probably be out there doing bad stuff, drinking, doing drugs. But with these horses, I wouldn't know where I'd be without these horses.
Sunday's races wrapped up with the Jason Goodstriker Memorial Warrior Championship Indian Relay Race. Named after a well-respected leader, announcer, educator, and athlete who passed away in 2020. He was also a longtime friend of Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, who appointed him to Alberta's Fair Deal panel. Kenney visited Lethbridge on Sunday to watch the competition and honor his friend. Goodstriker's father, prominent elder Wilton Goodstriker of the Kainai First Nation, gave the Premier a special honor, the Blackfoot name Matsomita, which means brave horse.
I had a ceremonial horse that was with me for 36, 37 years, grew to be quite old, not afraid of anything, go through anything, take on any kind of challenge that we presented him with. And Premier Kenney, I suppose, reminds me of the kind of courage that my ceremonial horse had. So it was a pleasure today to He's made decisions sometimes that might not have been popular, but he made them. It took courage and it took strength.
Well, it's an incredible honor to receive that from the blood tribe of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and Wilton Goodstriker is one of the most respected elders. I've worked really closely with First Nations as Premier and before that, and I'm just so glad to see things moving in a good way. We see so much, we focus a lot on the tragedies in the past, which we should, but we should also focus on a lot of the great things that are happening with First Nations here in southern Alberta with the Blackfoot people.
With no saddle or helmet, many Indigenous say the Indian relay is North America's original extreme sport. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Who will be Alberta's next leader? Our own Hal Roberts caught up with legislative correspondent Tyler Dawson to hash it out.
Tyler, Rachel Notley and the NDP have been acting like a government in waiting and are in election mode. Now, there are some rumblings that we could potentially see an early election if Danielle Smith is elected as the new UCP leader and wins. But at this point, what, they're just rumors?
The NDP is out there. You know, when Rachel Notley, well, she's been out and about. She's been all over, meeting with people all over the province, and they've had campaign-style announcements, policy announcements around labor. In particular, was the big one in recent days, and so their opposition research is in full swing. You know, Danielle Smith, for example, has radio shows, newspaper columns dating back sort of 20 years that they're looking through and things like that. So they're prepared, I would say. And the interesting thing about this is talking with some people in the United Conservatives, privately. They're very worried about a Rachel Notley versus Danielle Smith matchup. They're very, very worried that some of the things that Danielle Smith has proposed, the Alberta Sovereignty Act, for example, will be too extreme for many voters because, and not to belabor the point, but, rural Alberta and small town Alberta is going to largely go to the United Conservatives. Edmonton is probably largely going to go to the United Conservative, or to the NDP, I should say, which leaves sort of battleground Calgary.
After the break, a conversation with MP Rachel Thomas, who says the Liberals are not following the taxation trends of other nations, but are instead increasing payroll taxes. Welcome back. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas claims other nations are doing it better when it comes to taxes and that Canada should take note. Here's Hal Roberts and Rachel Thomas.
Instead of cutting payroll taxes, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says the Trudeau Liberals will be increasing the payroll tax yet again. Now, how would you approach the high cost of living if your party was in power?
Yeah, again, a really great question. I think it's bizarre that the Liberals are increasing taxes in the midst of an affordability crisis. It just makes zero sense whatsoever. We're seeing increase in carbon tax. We're seeing an increase in inflation tax. We're seeing an increase in payroll tax. I mean, most Canadians are watching 30, 40, 50% of their paycheck come off and be discarded before they even get to bring the money home. It's just not fair, and Canadians certainly cannot get ahead when that continues. I think this government, they claim to have our backs, but actually I would say they're actually on our backs, and applying an unnecessary burden to Canadians. And so I think we have a real opportunity here to help Canadians out. And again, that is, let's cut taxes. The Taxpayers Federation came out with a report showing what other successful countries are doing. There's 51 of them that are cutting taxes in order to help their citizens get ahead. Our government needs to look to do the same.
Now, a recent survey says around 24% of Canadians are buying less food due to higher prices, with almost 70% being women. So it may appear that children are impacted as well, what's transpiring with food inflation. It's also seniors who are deciding between buying food or their medications. So, Rachel, what's the answer here?
Yeah. Hal, I appreciate the question because I think you're highlighting a few really important groups here. You've highlighted families, particularly, let's say women who are raising children on their own. You've also highlighted seniors, and I would add a third group, and that is those who live with a disability. We're talking about folks who live on a very small government stipend. And those individuals don't have an opportunity to go get a job or earn a little bit of a higher wage or look for, new opportunities. They are at the mercy of a small amount of money. And that small amount of money has to extend over all of their necessary costs. When those costs continue to go up, but their income or their stipend stays the same, you can just imagine the detrimental impact that that has on their quality of life. And so, I think, in a country like Canada, you mentioned food costs going up. We should, we produce food for the world. So in this place, we should not be watching the lineups for food banks increase. Not here. Not here. Not when we do as well as we do in terms of agriculture and food production. And so I think ultimately, this is due to the poor decisions of the government to continue infusing fake cash into the economy. It's driven up inflation and ultimately it's hurting Canadians, and that needs to stop.
Now, the Trudeau Liberals are wanting farmers to cut back on fertilizer use and hence fertilizer emissions by 30% nitrogen. The producers we've chatted with, Rachel, say less fertilizer means less food on the table. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, certainly. I've had the opportunity to speak with producers in our area, and as you can imagine, they're very concerned about this. But all Canadians should be concerned about this. Canada produces food for the world, and we do it tremendously well, and it's a superpower that we should be celebrating day in and day out. And unfortunately, what we see here is the government is actually wanting to punish farmers rather than celebrate and reward them. And so by implementing this requirement that fertilizer be reduced by 30%, we're actually going to reduce the amount of food that we can produce, which when you have a place like Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe, under attack and therefore not producing the food it normally would, you then have starvation beginning to happen in countries in need. Canada could rise up and help be the solution to that. But when we have a government putting policies like this in place, it makes it awfully difficult. Not only that, but if I talk about the problem here at home, again, we already have increased lineups at food banks. You can imagine how the cost of food is going to increase when farmers are forced to produce less, but still need to make up that cost at the end of the day.
Rachel, the Bank of Canada Deputy Governor Paul Beaudry said in hindsight the federal government should have withdrawn stimulus measures earlier as economies were recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, which would have likely kept a lid on inflation. Your reaction to Mr. Beaudry's comment?
Here we are now, and the Bank of Canada is willing to acknowledge that actually there was some truth to what Mr. Pierre Poilievre was saying as the finance critic. I wish we would have heeded those words. Not for my sake, not for our sake as the Conservative Party of Canada, but for the sake of Canadians who deserve better.
Up next, MLA Drew Barnes discusses the key to picking the new UCP leader. But first, a quick break.
Instead of these straw men of who, might beat Rachel Notley or who might, do this or that, no, let's support those who best enhances Conservative values.